I have a fair amount of experience with cooperative stuff. I managed a food co-op in New Orleans. I was part of a collective restaurant in California. I've been real active with a co-op here. Fair amount of co-op, and I live in land trust, so I have a fair amount of experience with that. And also a fair amount of experience with the pitfalls, the problems that arise from that, how hard it can be. And I really am pretty convinced that why Mondragon, and I'll tell you what Mondragon is in a moment, but I can tell you before I even tell you what it is, that it's an amazing endeavor. I mean, just when I first learned the scope of it, I just was astounded that something that large and powerful could exist without it being widely known. But I'm pretty convinced that why it's done so well there and why it started there, I'm also convinced we can do it here, has to do with history and culture. And so I'm going to spend some time on that, and there's various pieces of that,
Is that in France?
It's actually in the Basque region of Spain, so it's right next to France, and they're Basque. Anyway, Mondragon is a vertically integrated cooperative, including industrial cooperatives, educational cooperatives, medical cooperatives, research and development cooperatives, social safety net cooperatives, and paying it forward. They have a whole segment that they fund that is working in Brazil and maybe Zimbabwe. There's an African country and a South American country. And they're just working in those two countries. They're trying to concentrate and have the impact. They also have a whole cooperative thing, but it's not so much paying it forward, but just helping empower people in South Korea who want to do this. When I was there, a whole group of South Koreans came, about 40 young people, and spent a day there. I got to spend 5 days there. And listen to tons of lecturing. It's just pretty interesting too, because these people are speaking English as a third language. And it seems like everybody in Mondragon is incredibly industrious, diligent, focused, and so they just pour the information out really quickly. A couple times people had to say, a little slower, please, because they're doing it with an accent, Anyway, it was powerful to me that the first night we were there, Ander, I guess Under is how he said his name. It's A-N-D-E-R, but it's Under was how it was said, was our main connection person. And typically of Mondragon, I got to tell you what Mondragon is first of all, I'm sorry. So it's vertically integrated, and it is 44,000 members of the working cooperatives, just in Spain. They have tried and given up trying to replicate it outside of Spain. They say, well, they just can't figure out how to do it. They want to support us in doing it, but they don't think they can do it. So they have a commitment to giving just work, and the same, all the other pieces of what they do except for the worker, right? If you're in a cooperative in Spain, then you're a worker, you get a vote. You have responsibilities, including paying in, investing in capital, capitalization of it all, and banking at their bank. You have a bunch of responsibilities, but you get a vote, you have a say. If you are working in one of their industries outside of Spain, you don't get that piece. You get a lot of other good stuff, but you don't get that piece.
What does vertically integrated mean?
So if you're horizontally integrated, it means you've got your industry covered, right? But if you're vertically integrated, you not only have your industry covered, but all the support stuff. So education, medical, all the stuff I listed. That's what it means. So they do it all. As far as they're concerned, capital is a tool. They are capitalists, but capital is a tool. It's there to serve the community. And so they always want to, they're incredibly disciplined and organized, and they don't let their businesses fail. They have like literally 100% success rate. New starts, it's kind of famous how few new starts make it in America, because it's the duty of all the other cooperatives to make it work. There's actually an example where they come up with these ideas, they do all this research, they train the people who are going to manage it, they put them in other industries, and let them work in other industries to learn how to manage, and then the new business will pay back, because obviously that person learning is not, they're getting paid as a manager, but they don't know how to manage yet. But they invest in all that. Literally, there was one business that with all that, the business was still utterly failing. And they realized they hadn't figured out the market right. To fire in Mondragon, you have to be really pretty toxic to get fired. They don't fire, they move people around. So they just said, okay, either you want time off, you can have time off, and time off at 80% of your pay, or you want to get some more training, you can go into training, or you can go, they just find other cooperatives that can hire you. And they just got everybody out of the place, and they just completely redid it. They came up with another business, they retooled, brought them back in. They don't let any business fail. Because every cooperative is responsible to help the other cooperatives, mutual aid. They're utterly invested in doing that. So they have just a huge array of industries. They're always coming up with new ones. I'll get to talking about their research and development thing. It's pretty impressive. It's a premier research and development facility in Europe. All kinds of major corporations pay the Mondragon Research and Development Facility to figure stuff out for them. And indeed, they all the time are coming up with new industries. And for example, when I was there, they were saying, yeah, we just made an EV car. We're not going to try and make EV cars. We don't think we can compete with all the big guys, but we're going to make an EV car so we can look at the parts and figure out how to make the parts for all the other people. And they're doing that kind of thing all the time. So that's what vertically integrated is. And they're committed always to being profitable, unless they don't try and be profitable with their school, of course. They're not profitable with their social safety stuff, safety net stuff, but they're profitable with anything that should be profitable. And there's a whole formula whereby money goes back into the cooperatives, and it probably goes into the industry that was profitable, but maybe not. If another industry is in trouble, then the money will go there. But also 10% goes into the community. And indeed, when Spain under Franco outlawed the Basque language and teaching the Basque language, they were big enough and powerful enough already that they were able to take their money and set up schools for 35,000 students and teach the Basque language. And then as soon as the democracy came in and it was legal to teach Basque again, most of those schools they gave to the communities. So they said, okay, normally they wouldn't do that. They'd put those resources into something that was making profit so they could then make more jobs. That's why they want to make profit, because capital is subservient to the needs of the community. But their mission is to make jobs, to have as many people employed as possible. So that is why it's vertically integrated. They're always looking for other ways to make jobs. And indeed, yes?
Do they utilize sociocracy versus consensus decision-making?
They don't do consensus decision-making, so to speak. They're pretty, I think they probably do in meetings and stuff. I think that, and I'm going to get into that, the whole culture of it stuff, but there's a pretty formal, hierarchical, but democratic setup. They definitely have kind of a technocratic class, and indeed, they have an overall rule that no worker can make more than 6 times what the lowest paid worker makes, but they also recognize, because they compete with the big guys. I mean, they are a major billions, they are the 7th largest industry in corporate organization, because they are now a corporate organization in Spain. Billions of dollars a year, in income. And so they want to be sure that they're competitive, so they actually hire the same kind of people that we have here that are making 350 times what the lowest paid worker makes, and they got that they can't offer them just 6 times. So they give them more, but it's nowhere near 350 times. And some of those people have been asked, why do you stay here? You could go off and make so much more. And they go, because I'm getting enough, and it's the solidarity. It's the rest of it. And that actually leads me to actually being able to get into it. So I say that culture and history starts it. And this region, if you've been to Europe, which this was my first time in Europe, it's just astounding to think about how old things are, And so I'm going to get to, talking about various buildings I was into because of their history. And they just go back to when the 100 Years' War was going on. They go back to further than that. Mondragon, Arasate is the other name for the town. Literally was a center, it was an industrial center. There was a lot of naturally occurring iron that was not even meant to be mined. You could just pick it up. And so they made a famous sword, the Toledo sword, which was used by all those horrible people that were out there cutting each other up, in the 100 Years' War, which is, if you read Barbara Tuchman or somebody like that, pretty nasty, pretty brutal. Even your side, you didn't want to have come through. Nobody treated the peasants very well. And indeed, we'll get to that in a minute, but they have this history that goes back to the point where, and back to Under, I guess, actually. I want to say Under because it's an A, but Under is how you say it. He really, before he even started giving us history and stuff, he gave us context. So the first night he met us, we just arrived, he came to meet us with his daughters because he lived 2 blocks away. And so his daughters came and listened and hung out and ate the Mondragon cookies that he was sharing because they have their own fancy cookies that they sell in the hotel, which is the Mondragon Hotel, so you can buy Mondragon gifts while you're there. Like I say, vertically integrated. And it was just like such a joy to see him both working at the same time that his kids were with him. And then the next day he took us to their headquarters, which if I had more luck with my computers, I could show you pictures. I was blown away by how totally fancy, big, and just like corporate headquarters, just like as fancy as can be. I was reading one book and they talked about how all the infrastructure that in the 80s and 90s that Mondragon had said, a little shabby. Not shabby anymore, boy. They're over that one, They got that one down. But he stood there in front of this great big corporate headquarters and pointed out this mountain, and it's just, everything's green, but there's this one big mountain in the distance and it's so tall it's white, And he said, this mountain has a witch, and he's struggling with language. Actually, he means more like a goddess. Because before they had Christianity, that mountain is where the spirit that allowed them to be fed was. And indeed, at the end of our time there, we got toured by the Mondragon, or Arasate historian. They actually have a city employee who's an historian. And she showed us in the church that there's this one kind of, sacristy or something with all this incredible carving and all that, and loads of the symbols are pagan. There's just this, the integration is there, and that part of their culture just carried over. And so, they had goddesses and stuff, and they then went through an incredibly hard time as Christianity came in, because also along came the whole king, duke kind of thing, and there were 2 dukes. And the main building that we met in, Hoteleria it's called, was this castle. Pretty ugly castle, just like a big, tall, square tower, But they had made it gorgeous because they bought it and renovated it, and it's their headquarters. So we're meeting in this ancient castle, And when we got the tour by the historian, she told the story that there was another castle exactly like it, and I actually saw it. We were actually touring something later on. I said, oh my God, there's that other castle. I got a picture of just the top of it. But it looked exactly like Hoteleria. And these 2 dukes were maybe 20, 25 miles apart, and they fought each other all the time across Mondragon. So in the church, right, there are these pictures, and there's fire in the back of the pictures because the town is always being burned down. Until finally they got it figured out. They said, we're building out of stone. And they just kept surviving it. They stayed together, and they had a long history of endeavors, cooperative endeavors, just to create the wealth they needed to survive. They cooperated to rebuild their town. They just cooperated whenever they needed to. And one of the ways they cooperated, right, was to develop this major industrial aspect to Mondragon, or Arasate. They made the Toledo sword. They did ironwork that was valued throughout Europe. And they had enough demand, which meant that they had a better economy, that they needed more iron. and they didn't have enough workers to get that iron. And they finally realized that there were a bunch of women who could be working, except for all the rules said that you couldn't do anything unless your husband said so. And if you didn't have a husband, you couldn't do anything. And so literally the historian took us and showed us this door, this incredible door, and she said, this is where it happened. And we stepped into this building, and I thought I could go back and listen to the recordings and tell you exactly when it happened, but unfortunately it's not audible. I didn't get it. I wasn't taking notes. I was counting on recording it all. But sometime like probably before the 100 Years' War, they empowered women to be economic entities unto themselves. Way back then. And it was like, they were open-minded enough to get that women could do what they needed, but they also got that they needed it, so they just empowered women. And I asked the historian, do you think that was the beginning of this like much more socially conscious culture? And she said, yeah, I think it is. It's where it started. So that's why I said it kind of ties to what the UN said. It's like, long time ago, somebody figured that out, and the results, have been ongoingly powerful. And I'm about to go into Father Arizmendi Adrete, and everybody says Father Arizmendi because it's just so long, and I can't even figure out exactly how to say it. So everybody says Father Arizmendi, and indeed, in California, there's this great workers collective called the Cheese Board, and they got so successful that they understood you then grow it, and they have taught other people how to do bakeries, and now there's a network of bakeries, and they're called Arizmendi. Anyway, Father Arizmendi, Jose Maria Arizmendi, was a Catholic priest, and when I read all about him and stuff, I thought, okay, he was a Catholic priest like some Catholic priests I know. They're basically just revolutionaries who are in the Catholic Church. But he was also very seriously a Catholic. He was really, he did his Mass stuff, he did his confession stuff, he did all that while visioning and advocating for and teaching and helping to create, this incredible workers' cooperative network, right? So Father Arizmendi, I think he lost an eye or something in a childhood accident, but it was an eye. And the Spanish Civil War was happening. The Basque had an army, and the Basque came down on the side of the Republicans, or loyalists, right? This is a situation where, the revolutionary government was actually the legitimate government. They had actually elected a left-wing government, and then Franco was trying to overthrow it. So, the loyalists and quote Republicans were the good guys. And the Basque joined them because one thing, they wanted to be separate, but they at least wanted autonomy, and they also happened to be much more liberal than Franco. So Father Arizmendi, at that time, was in the army, but he couldn't fight, so he was a reporter. And after the war was over, everybody was, they lost, and everybody that had been in the army was in a concentration camp, and they were going through picking out who they're going to kill. I mean, Franco killed hundreds of thousands of people, to consolidate, his victory. He created quite a terror. And Father Arizmendi had a friend who did the exact same job he did, and his friend said the wrong thing, and Father Arizmendi said the right thing, and he lived. His friend got shot. And then a year later, or 2 years later, he was sent to Mondragon to be the village priest. And immediately what he did, the war's over, right? And there had been people everywhere who fought on both sides. So there are these really bad divisions in the community, right? And his immediate solution to that was to create all of these young people's activities. And then as a priest say, I need you as parents to be involved in them, right? So he had all these like loyalist, Republicans, fascist, monarchist, right? All together because of their kids. And of course, what was the outcome? It was, pretty quickly the divisions ended and people were working together again. And Father Arizmendi basically under-described, people said, I don't think under really met Father Arizmendi. Maybe he did, but he would have been, pretty young when he did. But he described how Father Arizmendi was like this rain that they have in the Basque region, right? And this rain is like you look out the window and you want to go to market, you think, oh, it's nothing, I can make it to market, right? And you go to market, and by the time you get home, you're sopping wet. You know? And he said, that's what Father Arizmendi was like. You know? He was like that rain. He just talked to us all the time, and we couldn't tell what he was talking about. He just like, we couldn't get it. But then 5-10 years later, they totally got it. You know? And to me, that's a key piece. If we want to create a cooperative world, it's about education. You know? I mean, other places in Spain, there was a major anarchist movement in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish government went to the anarchists and said, you guys are in charge. You have all the power. They were that powerful. And indeed, they set up all these cooperative armaments industries and all kinds of other industries because of the power they had. And how did they get there? It started in the late 1800s when itinerant proselytizers for an anarchist vision of the world would go around and talk to villagers. And they would read books to the villagers, and the villagers who couldn't read would memorize them and go then say them to other people. And so there was that level of education. And I've read a history of the Spanish Civil War by Murray Bookchin, and it just makes such a point that why they had all that power was through education, a major focus on education. And that was Father Arizmendi too. And to me, that's a key piece of what we have to do. We have to find the models, the stories like Zev has, figure out the pieces, and share them widely, you know, and share them with the inspiration you have. I mean, you can just like, you know, give facts, or you can be excited about them and share those facts. And so that's what Father Arizmendi did. And it took a decade of that kind of education, right? And in that time, he started a technical school. And at that point, right, at first he went to like the major industry and said, can you fund a technical school? And they're like, no, we can't do that, you know? And indeed, they had it set up that like the people in that village were not qualified to go to a technical school, you know, because of class. They didn't deserve to go to a technical school, right? And so he gave up. He gave up on trying to get this big industry to do what made sense, to give more skills so you had more skilled workers. The industry could grow, right? It was logical. He made that. He was always really good at dealing with the powers that be. You know, figuring out how to talk to them, how to be dynamic and ask for what made sense, right? But when he didn't get it, he literally had cans on every corner in Mondragon and did a fundraising thing. And they raised, I don't remember the details now, but given their income and that time, the amount of money they raised blew my mind. Basically, you know, they just got everybody in town to donate, and he started a technical school, right? And then it's a 2-year college, right? And then he wanted the students that had done best to go to engineering school. There was no engineering school anywhere around, right? There was no school that was going to let them in. He used his connections in the Catholic Church to get a Catholic university a couple of provinces away, and set it up so they could do correspondence and become engineers. And this was like mind-blowing to the people in the village, that their, you know, poor, you know, sons, it was just sons then, you know, could actually become engineers, right? But then they still had no industry, right? So he spent like more than a decade, right, just talking with 5 of these engineers, right? And finally, in 1956, I think, they started a small kerosene stove business, right? And they named it Ulagor, which was the first letter of all their names, you know? Ulagor, U-L-G-O-R, right? And within a year or two, he's like saying, we need a bank. And they're like, we don't need a bank. And we hate banks, right? You know? We don't like banks. We don't want a bank, right? He knew they needed a bank, right? And he was so determined that they have a bank because he knew they needed it, that he forged their names to create the bank. You know, which I love. You know, very practical guy, right? He created the bank, right? And within 6 months, they were like, "Thank God you have that bank," because of course they needed that credit. You know, he got that you have to have credit. You know, and indeed, I've studied a lot of history. There was a really powerful movement in the United States in the late 1800s called the Populist Movement. And it started out with farmers, and they struggled mightily for credit. There's one description in there where in order to survive and stay in business as a cooperative, they had to call out for everybody to bring their money. And people drove from hundreds of miles with whatever wealth they had, like candlesticks, wedding rings, and they made it that time. They actually didn't get crushed. But they didn't have any more money after that. So they did get crushed in the end, you know. But so he got how important credit was, you know. And so he created the bank, and then they were off to the races. It wasn't long after that they had started another cooperative, and pretty soon they started a Cooperative Schools, and it kept growing from that. There's now like 102, I think, cooperatives in Mondragon. Really interesting to me is the fact that there's like 102 cooperatives in Mondragon. I mean, in that Basque province. There's more in Spain, but in that province there's 102. But in the Basque region, there's significantly more cooperatives than that. So that's a piece that we don't have, that we have to deal with. We've got a few cooperatives, but they actually have been cooperating since back when they're making Toledo swords. You know, so they knew how to do it, and we don't. You know, so we have to figure that piece out. And unfortunately, that's what I most wanted at this workshop, and that was the thing that they don't even think you have to teach. You know, and I actually said when they were talking about their schools, I said, so do you have cooperative classes in the schools? They said, no, but the whole school's cooperative. You know? And indeed, it's Reggio, which is what this school here is. And I don't know very much about Reggio at all. In my mind, it's pretty similar to Waldorf schools and things like that, you know. But a critical piece, right, and that's the case here too, is parents are expected to be involved, you know. Not just, you know, send their kid to school and make sure they do their homework, you know, or do a few little things, but to be significantly involved, you know. And that's the way it is there too. And so basically when I asked that question, he said, yeah, by the time they're out of school, they just have it, you know. And that's what we have to start creating.